What's up, guys? It's Rey-Jay back with another video. And in this one, I want to break down what's happening with SPY, Tsla, Nvda, the QQQ, and a couple of other tickers. I'm also going to talk about why tomorrow is going to be a very important day as the market is going to be approaching some critical support. I'm going to be breaking down some very key levels to watch for simultaneously. But just know that I am not a financial planner, so take nothing I say as financial advice whatsoever. And also, if you guys can, please check out my Moomoo link. If you deposit $100, you're guaranteed 5 free stocks. If you deposit $1,000, you're guaranteed 15 in total, not to mention an 8.1% APY on uninvested cash. Anyways, let's talk about the markets. Right now, the market had a very interesting range break that happened. SPY was originally stuck between 609 and 606 per share, going back and forth for the most part for the last 4 or 5 days. Then what happened was SPY lost the 606 area pretty early on. I did warn everyone to watch for 604 if that happens. I did talk about the risk of downside forming this double top, and that is what happened so far. So with SPY dipping, we're going to be watching to see if 604 holds. Otherwise, we could be approaching our 50 EMA or very close to that 602 area. It also aligns with some key supports. I'll be talking about whether or not this may cause a bounce and what I think is going to happen at least moving forward for the charts. But I'll first talk about some news and data first, then I'll break down the charts in more detail. So the first thing worth mentioning is this. The large majority of stocks were in the red. We saw Nvda selling off. We saw the majority of tech stocks selling off. Only Google and Microsoft were pretty much just flat. Then Apple was somewhat green because of bullish news that came out when it comes to their AI investments. And besides that, finance was very weak. Retail was flat, and most sectors were in the red. So the majority of stocks did sell off for the day. And this is not necessarily a surprise because we did warn about this in my video from yesterday. Now, on top of this, I wanted to call out that the data that's coming out for tomorrow is going to be for Tuesday, December 10th, 2024. At 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, we have very minor pieces of data coming out involving payrolls and labor costs. Besides that, at 11:30 a.m., we have the 42-day bill auction, and then more minor data that's coming out, so watch to see how that ends up going. But watch that, at least going into tomorrow, an hour before market open, there might be some volatility. Then at 11:30 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, depending on what this data causes. But I don't think the data is going to be that significant. This is nothing compared to like a CPI report, so it shouldn't be too crazy. So please keep that in mind. Now, in terms of earnings, just know we just got Oracle announcing its earnings. They did not do too well. And then going into tomorrow and beyond, we have like AutoZone announcing earnings and more retail. Then we have GameStop after market close. For Wednesday, we have Macy's and then Adobe and a few more, and then Costco on Thursdays. Just keep that in mind. This is what the earnings calendar looks like. But Oracle is going to be the biggest one, at least for the time being. As far as Oracle is going, unfortunately, their earnings were not that great. They ended up seeing their earnings and revenue miss with a disappointing forecast, at least based off what expectations were beforehand. So their EPS was $1.47 adjusted. That's somewhat below expectations. Their revenues at $14.06 billion. That's also somewhat below expectations. Please note that for very big companies like this, we tend to have a very picky analysts that want their earnings to be very close, if not better than expected. If they're this close or below, it's not the best, and that's why the share price has been coming down. Despite the fact that net income did increase 26%, that is not that good. There was booming demand for their computer power that can handle their AI projects, so that's been some good growth for them. But because of this, it's not as great. When it comes to what's holding up for the future, it did raise its guidance back in September. However, right now, as far as things are going, they're not really changing it too much, and that's what's making investors a little bit more concerned. There wasn't anything that really wowed investors, and for the most part, they missed on earnings. That's why Oracle's in the red. The last thing I'm going to talk about is these pieces of data right here. Then I'll talk about the charts. The market is neutral. We're getting very close to fear right now. I do think this could shift a little bit more to this side as the market starts to sell off a bit more. Right now, momentum is at greed as the market slowed down a bit. We're not at extremes right now. The market's due for a bit of a pullback, so it's no surprise. The put to call option ratio is also at extreme greed. That's making up the majority of our sentiments, but we'll have to see if we get a small bounce here because there could be a little bit more put buying that's happening. So far, I'm not really seeing that. I'm not seeing as many shorts piling into the markets yet. Volatility remains neutral. The VIX is still neutral despite the fact that it's trying to break out here. It needs more of a breakout to see a bigger move for the markets. Otherwise, it's still kind of stuck in a very in a range that's very tight. Besides that, what do I see for SPY and the others? What is my prediction, at least moving forward? The answer is that right now we are looking a bit more bearish. Now, we have resistance very close to about 605.5 and then 606. That range right there is going to be our main resistance. That aligns with our 20 EMA. I also want to note that if we break 606, we're looking for an attempt to get back up to 607.5, which is looking very unlikely. If we're bearish, you want to see us lose 604. If that fails us, we easily go down to 602. 602.5 to 602 is going to align very closely to this range here. But I would say the bigger range to watch for is like 601 to 602. And the reason I'm saying that is because our 50 EMA happens to be there. And then right where my cursor is, we have previous resistance becoming support at 601. So there's a lot of support around 601 to 602. I think that we could be approaching that range. If that fails us, then 598 is going to be my next target. But for now, we're not going to worry about all of those. For now, just know that the chart does look more bearish. We have a double top like structure. And generally, this does lead us to coming back down towards these levels down here. Because when you look at, for instance, the daily time frame on SPY, we have this gap to fill. And then there's also like these imbalances below. So what I presume is going to happen is this. So always watch your levels just to be safe. But tomorrow we do like to grab liquidity in the morning period before it starts to continue this sell-off. And we could be looking for an attempt to get back down to 602 over the next couple of days. I think the share price is more bearish as we have a double top leg structure. And this does suggest that 602.5 to 601 is most likely coming. So we could dip a little bit lower. However, despite the fact that I'm saying we're going to likely dip lower, that does not turn me into a perma bear because I think that the market could dip a bit, but this is just a temporary pullback, and we're still very, very open to the possibility of a much larger bounce. So keep that in mind. There could be a small temporary dip before we attempt to bounce much bigger later on. The market will continue to break all-time highs in the next couple of weeks, but for the short term, we're looking a bit more bearish. I hope that's as clear as possible. So we could dip lower to the lower 600s. Eventually, there's going to be some kind of bounce coming. We're not ready yet. We are bearish for the time being, so look for a bit more downside. Then we'll see how it goes from there. For other factors, we have ES. ES is below its 50 EMA at 60.63. If we reclaim that, we're looking for resistance at 60.80. If we can't reclaim that, we're looking for a dip closer to about 60.50. I'm favoring that ES is going to consolidate a bit here, then start dipping lower to about 60.50 before it tries to bounce. Our previous resistance becoming support is going to be around 60.40. So I think we could be getting very close to that area, that 60.50 to 60.40 area, before we see an attempt to rebound, possibly. But for now, just focus on the move to the downside as it's looking a little bit more prominent for ES. Now, Nvda has a possible inverse head and shoulders that could be forming, but there's no sign of a true bounce yet. So I do think we might retest 137, see some consolidation around here. If that fails us, we could get closer to like 135 before we try to bounce. So we'll look for a retest of 137, or maybe some consolidation for now, and then we'll see if we get a bounce back up to 141 soon. For now, look for a little bit more downside and some consolidation before we see anything else. So for now, Nvidia still remains kind of weak. Bitcoin has this liquidity grab right over here where this wick is, so I do anticipate it might try to pop a bid for about 98,371, but then it could reject here and just continue to dip. So look for a small bounce before a continuation lower. For other factors out there, we have Tesla. Tesla pumped all the way up to about 404 per share, making an absolutely fantastic move. Then we got this big rejection all the way down towards 380, only to get bought back up to 393. So I expect this to push a little bit higher towards the mid 390s, 395 to 396, where this imbalance happens to be. And then we could reject right over here as time goes on. So watch and see how this ends up moving. Look for a push, then a rejection. And we'll have to see how well Tesla holds up. I think it might be range bound right now because we do love to get bought back up around the 380 area. But the issue with Tesla is that 400 is a very tough resistance, so we might not break it that quickly. I think tomorrow we push up to about the 395 to 400 area again, but we might not break it immediately. We might see something very similar today as to how we pushed a bit, came back down, consolidated. So that's the most likely case. However, for the longer term, / medium term, I do think Tesla will eventually break 400 and remain a lot more bullish. For now, look for another test of 400 to 395, and we'll see how we end up reacting. Might push a bit, then consolidate at least for now. For NQ, we're looking a bit more bearish. We have to reclaim 21,500 to turn back up. Otherwise, this is favoring a move back down to about 21,400 before it tries to rebound. Look for some downside to 21,400. Then we'll have to see what we end up doing from here. If that does not hold, I think 21,326 is coming. So look at 21,400, 21,326 is the two main supports. We could be tipping in that range before it tries to bounce. ES has a similar trend, by the way. For the QQQ, we're looking for 521.05 as our main support. If that fails us, and what could be happening is we could be forming kind of like a head and shoulders here. This is like a left shoulder, this is like a head, and then maybe a right shoulder is about to form before it continues to dip. So look for an attempt to rebound to about 523 before a continuation lower. If we lose 521, look at 520. If 520 fills us, we fill the gap all the way down to 517. So this does look like a left shoulder and a head, so we might be forming like a right shoulder before it continues to dip. So watch for that very closely, at least for the QQQ. I think that we are still looking a bit more bearish. Now, we could rebound to 523 tomorrow morning, but then there's going to be a risk of us eventually dipping to 520 and then eventually 517 if that fails. Despite that, Apple looks more bullish. We're looking for 248 and then 250 is our targets. We could be pushing a bit higher on Apple, which could help the market to some extent, but then more stocks are more red, so it's not really, it's kind of like offsetting that, so just keep that in mind. For Netflix, we got this big rejection. We got this big move to the downside after we got some negative news. However, we're looking at 913 as our main support. As long as we hold this, we could be looking for an attempt to get back up to about 920 tomorrow. The thing is, there could be a change in structure here because there's a big red bar here. If we make a lower high very close to this resistance around the 920 to 922 area, we could reject and start dipping from here. So we have a big red bar here. We could push and reject, so keep that in mind. For MSTR, we have a very, very interesting looking trend as there's a bit of a downtrend here. We could push closer to about 386 and we'll see if we reject. So watch and see how we end up going. Look for a push attempt and we'll see if we reject off that area, but I do think it might push closer to about the 380 area before it comes back down. I would say that the share price is more bearish overall, but there might be a small push coming before it continues to dip lower. I think ultimately we will be dipping to about the 350s. We push first and maybe reject as the most likely case. Celsius is more bullish. We have this resistance at 30.8. If that breaks, we're looking for 32. If not, we could reject here. But we're in a range right now. We are technically a little bit more bullish. There could be a small dip close to 30 tomorrow before it tries to break out higher as we have this imbalance up here. So we'll have to see how it goes. This is a nice kind of like inverse head and shoulders. Look for a dip closer to 30 before it tries to break out. And I think we're doing a great job. For Supermicro, this could be dipping back down to about 42.69. If that fails us, we're going to be looking for essentially 40 and then 38. So look for a dip to 42.69 and 40, and we'll see if we bounce off that or not. Overall, I think that there's going to likely be a dip that's coming. For Palantir, we got this big rejection, unfortunately. We were not able to hold this support, so I was hoping it would continue to hold up. We pushed about the 82 area, then rejected, so it did go higher as you predicted, only to come back down. It's holding its 20 EMA at 72.5, excuse me. If 72.5 fails, this will be dipping closer to about that 70 area than 68. If it holds this, it could try to rebound for 75 plus. I presume it's going to be pushing higher for about that 75.75 area before it starts to dip back down. So watch to see if that ends up being the case. With a big red bar forming, typically this does lead to more downside. So just like others, we do tend to like push higher for like the 75, 76 area before it starts to come back down. So I would recommend like drawing a fib retracement chart like this and then watching to see these levels. We might attempt to get back up to our 0.382 area before it rejects and comes back down. So just keep that in mind. For Rivian, it is more bullish, outperforming the market as we had a very, very nice run today. This is outperforming very, very nicely. I think that's because we got a buy rating from different analysts. So this could attempt to push up for 15. If that breaks, we're going to go much higher. It looks very, very strong right now. As long as we do not lose 12.5, I think we're favoring a move to 15 plus. So look for an attempt to hit 15. We'll see if we break that or not, but this could still push a bit more. For others out there, we have SoFi. SoFi is looking quite decent in terms of this pattern. So the issue with SoFi is the fact that there is a very clean looking head and shoulders right here. We're looking to see if 15.5 holds. If it holds, it will consolidate here. But if it doesn't hold, we're going to be looking for a dump to about the 14s. So I think the risk is to the downside, and we could be looking for the 14.5 area very soon. The IWM Russell 2000 has a very, very nice looking channel right here. What I mean by that is if you look at this very, very closely, we are continuing to be just like stuck right here, not really making the best of moves. So with that being said, I think that we may continue on this trend, and we'll have to see what happens at least moving forward, at least from here. So with that being said, just keep in mind that we are not looking too bad. We may continue this downtrend just for a little bit longer. Look for an attempt to rebound to about 238 before it continues to dip to about 236. Then we'll see what happens after that, at least moving forward. So keep that in mind, guys. Right now, there is still that risk to the downside that is still perpetuating, and we'll just have to see how it goes, at least from there. For other factors out there, we have AMD. AMD got this big rejection starting to dip lower. We're looking for essentially 130 as our main support. It has to hold that. Otherwise, it's going to be at risk of dipping towards 128. So give this some more time to develop. There's a bit of a downtrend developing here. So watch and see if that ends up being the case. Look for 130 and 128, and we'll see what happens after that. For ARM, we're just trading sideways in a range. We're completely range bound right now. I think that we have resistance around 140 and support at 138.37. So I expect this to trade sideways for a little bit longer before we see anything else. We have a double top leg structure on coin. We could attempt to retest 322 before we reject again. So look for an attempt to get to 322. We'll have to see if you hold that. This does look like a double top, which tends to be more bearish. So look at 322 to be retested, maybe a little bit higher before it starts to turn back down to 312. That's the most likely case I'm looking for. Amzn looks a little bit weaker here. It's trying to pivot. Might retest 227 before it turns back down. But I think we're on our way down to about 224.5, then eventually the 223 area. So that's what I'm essentially looking for, a little bit more downside as the most likely case. So please keep that in mind. For others out there, we also happen to have a little bit of weakness developing for Meta and the others. So if you look at like 613.5, for example, that's going to be our main support, not to mention the 609 area. So I think we could try to rebound for 617 before we end up dipping for about 609. If that does not hold us, we're going to be dipping back down towards 600 flat. So I think we rebound a bit for about 615, and then we could be rejecting for 610 or below as the most likely possibilities. For Microsoft, we're dipping a bit right here. We have this resistance to watch for around this 450 area. If we don't hold above that, there's going to be a risk of this dipping back down towards 442. So I'm favoring that this is going to be dipping to about 442, so please keep that in mind. And then we'll have to see what happens after that. For Google, we look more bullish. We're looking for 178 to 180 is our targets. We could be pushing for 180 before anything else. So please keep that in mind. For DJT, we're just trading sideways. We had a high here, came down, made a lower high. I was talking about this in my video from yesterday. So I expect this to dip to about 34.26, and we'll see if it bounces off that or not. The VIX, on the other hand, is doing a good job at holding up. We are looking a bit more bullish. If we break past 14.25, this will continue to soar for 15. That could signify the market's about to see a little bit more downside. The 10-year is also bouncing. It's going to be going to 4.22. That's a little bit more bearish. And then the dollar index, I think that 106.16 is looking a little bit more probable as our resistance. If that breaks, we're looking for 106.4 as our target, which tends to be a little bit more bearish. So that being said, with that being said, guys, I thank you all so much for listening. The market's in a very, very interesting place. I think that we're looking a bit more bearish right now, looking at this trend and the new developments. So please watch your levels very, very closely. For now, I do anticipate that we could see a little push in the morning, like a little pop before we continue to dip lower. I think that the downside targets are not fully made yet, so there's going to be a risk of more downside. All right, so I do favor bears just temporarily, but this could be creating another buying opportunity for the end of the year. Not financial advice when I say that, and that's all I'm basically eyeing for now. Anyways, thank you all so much for listening. Have a very, very good day, night, or evening, wherever you guys are around the world. We have one more full day until CPI comes out on Wednesday, by the way, so we'll have to see what happens with that. But until I see you guys again, I'll be back tomorrow morning before market open to give you guys another update. Until then, I just wish everyone the best. I just want to hope that you all take care from this point on. Thank you for listening, and peace out.